The house felt heavier without her. Not empty, but quiet in a way that made every sound echo, the creak of the wooden floor, the flutter of curtains in the breeze. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for someone to notice the absence. I walked through the hall, past the photos of smiling relatives, and paused at her bedroom door. Sunlight fell softly across the floor, highlighting the familiar sight of her old writing table. That table had always held a quiet mystery. As a child, I had been drawn to it, curious about what lay hidden in its drawer. But Grandma had always stopped me, her voice gentle yet firm. "Some things," she said, smiling softly, "are meant to wait." Now, standing alone, the drawer called to me. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the handle. Slowly I opened it. Inside were neatly stacked papers, yellowed with age, and at the bottom, a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn, the edges softened from years of handling. I lifted it with care, the weight of it heavier than I had expected, not just paper, but memories, thoughts, and secrets waiting to be told. The first page was simple, yet it took my breath away. "If you are reading this, my silence has finally spoken." Grandma had never spoken of her past, not the girl she once was, not the dreams she had tucked away. She had laughed, loved, and given endlessly, but she had kept herself hidden behind quiet smiles and gentle words. I sat down on the chair beside the table, the leather journal cradled in my hands. For a moment I hesitated, then turned the page. I was 17 when my life stopped belonging to me. Her words were raw, honest, and immediately intimate. She wrote about the girl she had been, curious, spirited, full of small dreams. A girl who loved reading late into the night, who wrote little poems no one ever saw. Then came her marriage, arranged and unavoidable. She spoke of wearing jewelry, heavy with expectation, and smiling even when her heart was not ready. "He was not cruel," she wrote, "just distant, polite, absent." The young woman in the pages felt both familiar and strange. This was not the grandma I knew, always calm and nurturing. This was a girl learning to survive in a world that asked her to disappear. As I read further, the journal spoke of her days as a mother. She loved deeply, yet often quietly mourned the life she might have had. Her writing had become a sanctuary, a place where she could speak freely, where her voice could live. "I stopped writing for myself," she admitted. "I wrote grocery lists instead of dreams." A lump formed in my throat. The quiet strength I had always admired was born of sacrifice, of dreams put aside for the sake of others. And yet, even in that sacrifice, there was hope tucked carefully into words, waiting for someone to understand. The sunlight shifted across the room as I turned the next page, and I realized this was only the beginning. The journal held more than memories. It held the essence of a life lived quietly, faithfully, and yet profoundly. I pressed the journal to my chest, promising silently that her story would not remain hidden any longer. I opened the next pages of the journal, and the words pulled me into a world I had never seen before, the world of the girl who became my grandmother. I was 17 when my life stopped belonging to me. She had written. Those words, simple yet heavy, carried a truth I had never imagined. The girl in the journal was spirited and curious, full of small joys that had long been hidden from the world. She loved to read by the window, where sunlight fell on her notebooks, and she wrote little poems that no one ever read. Her handwriting danced across the page, revealing a personality full of life. Yet there was also a quiet sadness, a sense of something slipping away before it had even begun. Then came the day of her marriage. The words slowed as she described the preparations. The smell of henna, the silk of her outfit, the heavy jewelry that felt like chains, and the nervous excitement mingled with fear. "They said it was for my future," she wrote. "No one asked if I wanted it." Her mother had adjusted her departure gently, whispering, "Be strong, my child." But the comfort was fragile. And the young girl inside my grandmother felt lost, standing on the edge of a life she had not chosen. Her husband was not cruel, she wrote, but distant, polite, absent, a shadow beside her in the same room, sharing space without understanding the heart that now belonged to him. Loneliness, she realized, was not always the result of being alone. Sometimes it lived quietly even in the presence of others. Even in these pages, her love for small details shone through the gentle mornings, the taste of tea, the laughter of birds outside the window, the way sunlight fell on the garden. She noticed things deeply, felt everything keenly, yet had to bury those feelings under the weight of expectation. I had to learn to survive by becoming needed, she wrote. Her words revealed a girl who was learning, day by day, how to make herself invisible while still holding the world together. She learned to smile when tired, to speak softly when frustrated, and to fold her dreams neatly into her heart so they would not disturb anyone else. And yet, she never lost herself entirely. Hidden in the corners of her mind were small rebellions, little sparks of hope. She wrote about secret wishes to see the world, to study, to write, to teach, but those were dreams that had no place in the life laid out for her. Some dreams are not meant to die, she admitted, only to sleep. Even as a young bride, she carried hope quietly. She did not forget, and she did not give up entirely. She merely waited for someone who might understand her story someday. Reading her words, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and admiration. Sorrow for the girl who had to hide her voice, and admiration for the woman she became despite everything. The girl in the journal was vulnerable, frightened, and daring all at once. She had survived the hardest parts of life silently, and yet her soul remained alive, tender and alert. The sunlight in the room shifted as I read on, the shadows moving across the table like time itself. I realized that this journal was more than a collection of memories. It was a bridge to understanding, the person my grandmother had been before the world asked her to be, someone else entirely. Her voice, once silent for decades, now spoke clearly, and I felt as if she was sitting beside me, sharing not just her story, but the essence of her life, the truth of her spirit, and the courage she had carried quietly through the years. In that moment, I made a quiet promise to her that this story would not remain hidden, that the girl she had been, with all her dreams, fears, and resilience, would finally be seen and remembered. The pages of the journal turned easily under my fingers, but each one felt heavier than the last, carrying not just words, but decades of quiet endurance. The girl I had met in part 2 was now growing into the woman. My grandmother became the mother, the wife, the pillar of her family, yet still carrying the tender soul of the young girl within. I learned to survive by becoming needed, she wrote. And reading those words now, I could feel the weight she had carried so gracefully. Her life became a series of duties, chores and responsibilities, each one slowly erasing pieces of herself. The laughter of her children, the meals she prepared, the quiet conversations with neighbors, all of it was done with love, but also with a subtle exhaustion that few ever noticed. She wrote about motherhood not as a joyless burden, but as a complex tapestry of love, sacrifice, and longing. She described waking before dawn to prepare breakfast, washing clothes by hand, and still finding moments to teach her children kindness, patience, and courage. Yet beneath the careful smile she showed to the world, there were hidden aches, a longing for the dreams she had buried, a quiet yearning for a life that could have been. I stopped writing for myself, she admitted. I wrote grocery lists instead of dreams. Her words were honest, almost painfully so. And yet, they carried an elegance, a rhythm of resilience. Even in the midst of her sacrifices, she found ways to live, fully in the small moments, watching sunlight spill across the floor, listening to the wind in the trees, feeling the warmth of a child's hand in hers. Then came loss. The journal turned somber as she wrote about her husband, the man who had shared her home, but not her heart. He had passed away quietly, leaving her with the familiar silence she had always known. She did not write about grief in dramatic terms. There were no tears, no anger, but there was the subtle ache of absence. A loneliness she had learned to live with, even as she continued to give, to nurture, and to protect her family. Loneliness does not always come from being alone, she wrote. Sometimes it lives quietly, even when surrounded by people who love you. Her words struck me deeply. I realized that the strength I had always admired in her, the calm, composed, gentle presence, was born not from ease, but from years of quiet endurance. She had survived life's demands with dignity, never allowing the world to see the depths of her sacrifices, and yet never allowing herself to be crushed by them either. Even as her life became defined by responsibility and loss, there were sparks of rebellion in the pages. Little moments where she allowed herself to laugh, to dream, to notice the beauty around her. A bird singing outside the window. The fragrance of jasmine in the garden. A poem she wrote in secret, tucked into a drawer. Some dreams are not lost, she wrote. They are only waiting for someone to remember them. As I read, I felt a profound connection to her, not just as my grandmother, but as a woman who had lived a life full of unspoken strength and quiet hope. Her journey through love, loss, and silence was not one of despair, but of resilience. It was a testament to the way a person can endure hardship, embrace responsibility, and still carry a tender heart within. I closed the journal for a moment, feeling the weight of her life in my hands. Each page was a reminder that love is not always loud, that strength can be quiet, and that even in a life shaped by duty and loss, the human spirit can shine with grace. I knew then that her story was not just her own. It was a lesson for me, for anyone willing to listen. That silence can be powerful, but it is the voice we find within it that shapes who we become. The journal had already revealed so much her childhood. The girl she once was, the life she built through love, loss, and sacrifice. But as I turned the next pages, I realized there was still more, something deeper, something she had held close for decades, hidden even from herself in the quiet of her daily life. There was a life I imagined, she wrote, one that never fit into the world that awaited me. Her words painted a picture of a small, cozy house filled with books, sunlight streaming through tall windows, and the quiet laughter of friends and students. She had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, of standing in a classroom where her voice mattered, where she could inspire, guide, and grow alongside others. She imagined a life of freedom, of curiosity, and of choice, a life she was never allowed to live. And yet, even as she wrote of this secret world, she did not dwell in regret. There was acceptance in her tone, a quiet understanding that life had taken her along a different path. Her happiness had been built not from selfish ambition, but from the love she gave to her family, the care she provided, and the lives she quietly touched. Some dreams are not lost, she wrote. They sleep, waiting for someone to remember them. Reading those words, I understood the true strength of my grandmother. She had endured a lifetime of duties and responsibilities, yet she had never completely abandoned hope. Even in silence, she had preserved a spark of who she truly was. And now, through her journal, that spark reached me. The final pages of her journal were tender, reflective, and filled with wisdom she had gained over a long, quiet life. She wrote of her grandchildren, of the small joys she had found in ordinary moments, of the peace that comes when one accepts life's imperfections but continues to give and love wholeheartedly. I am old now, she wrote. My hands ache, my body is tired, but my heart is lighter. If you are reading this, know that silence can protect us, but it can also hide what is most important. Speak, dream, choose, live, and remember me, not for what I sacrificed, but for what I survived. As I closed the journal, the room seemed to breathe with her presence. The house no longer felt empty. Every corner, Every ray of sunlight, every soft creak of the floor now carried her story. I realized that through her words, I had learned the essence of her life, not just the girl she once was, or the woman she became, but the human being who quietly bore the weight of the world while still preserving her inner self. Her story was a reminder that life is rarely simple. Dreams may need to be postponed, voices may need to be hushed, and sacrifices may demand more than one feels able to give. But even in the quietest of lives, there is courage, there is hope, and there is enduring strength. And now, her story was not silent. It lived in me, and through me, it could continue her hidden dreams, her tender wisdom, and her unspoken courage reaching into the world, inspiring anyone willing to listen. Moral lesson: silence can protect us, but truth sets us free. Dreams may be delayed, and life may demand sacrifice, but our inner voice, our courage, and our hope should never be forgotten. The strength to endure and the choice to speak are what define a meaningful life.